Hi everyone, my name is Philippe from the Procurement Tactics team. I'm here today with Marijn Overvest. He's the founder of Procurement Tactics. Today we'll be discussing how you prepare for your negotiations. Marijn, I would like to give you the word just to give a quick introduction about yourself.
Thank you. So for the audience, my name is Marijn Overvest, typical Dutch name, and I'm the founder of Procurement Tactics. At Procurement Tactics, we have an online platform, and basically what we do is that we upskill procurement teams from all over the world on several topics. We're mainly focused on upskilling procurement teams on how to drive sustainable procurement further, how to negotiate better, and how to leverage the potential of AI in procurement and in negotiations. I'm happy to be here today.
Great, it's great having you. And I will start this with a great question, which is the beginning of a negotiation. What are 3 things that you like to remember yourself when preparing for a negotiation?
Let me answer that. So I think that the first one is that very important to not solely think of what is important for me, but start your negotiation preparation first with what is important for the company and the person that I'm negotiating with.
Yeah.
The second one is to make sure that you align all the goals of your negotiation strategy which you prepare in your preparation are aligned with the business goals from your company that you are working for. So in that sense, in an ideal negotiation preparation world, there will be the company strategy driving towards topic X. The procurement team strategy would help with building blocks on how to achieve that goal. And your single negotiation should help with adding value to the building blocks of the procurement teams, which is adding value to where does the company want to go to. So I would say if you combine those 2 things with sociable behavior in the negotiation itself, I'm sure that the combination of your research and your sociable behavior in the negotiation will lead to top deal results.
That's great, thank you for sharing. And based on this last question, what do you think are common mistakes that people make throughout the negotiation?
Ooh, nice one. Let me think. Talking too much. That's one of the first ones. We tend to see procurement professionals that like to talk.
Yeah.
In my opinion, procurement managers should ask questions. They should not talk. So we should fully understand the perspective of our sales professionals that we are dealing with. We should understand their personal needs, their personal behavior, but also the business needs. And when you talk, you don't learn and you only share.
Yeah.
Let the sharing be part of the sales process. Let the questions be part of our process.
And listening, right?
Indeed.
Listening is very important.
Because what happens after you ask a question, people usually answer it. Yeah. Another mistake that I see that people are commonly making is being too eager to close a deal.
Yeah.
That is of course a very important one to master, but if you're too eager to close a deal, you will never find out if you achieved your maximum deal results. So in that sense, if you want to achieve maximum deal results, you should push your suppliers towards within the boundaries that are acceptable as hard as possible to make sure that you know if you reached their limits. So that's an important mistake to avoid.
In that sense, would you say that patience is an important ability that you should have?
Yes, for sure. On the positive side, that's for sure. Yeah. Another mistake that I would highlight is not to have an endless list of gives and takes. So in that sense, being creative in the deal phase is very important.
Yeah.
And you can only be creative in the negotiation phase if you think in the preparation phase of which are the carrots and the sticks and the gives and the takes that I can give my supplier to bring the negotiation further in the positive scenario.
Yeah.
But the takes and the sticks, how can I hurt my supplier to make sure that they come a bit more towards my position if things tend to go south?
Yeah. So how do you research and gather data from a supplier before entering a negotiation?
What I usually did is that the majority of the deals that I had to close in my period working for the large global retailer as a procurement manager were taking place from, I would say, September until Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. So before the New Year came into the world, we were finalizing our deals. So what I usually did with my suppliers is that I scheduled a session in the summer. And I called it, it's typical Dutch, but I called it the feet on the table session. What I meant with that, we did not have an agenda for the session, but we would just gather for 1 or 2 hours. Usually I took the initiative to visit my suppliers or to go to their office or to meet in a cafe or a restaurant.
Yeah.
And we would just sit down and talk about life, about business goals, about how is your year approaching so far, what are your goals from this year and for next year. So in that sense, to create a bond between the personal side, but also to understand their perspective a bit better. So that's a, I would say, an informal tip. Another tip that you can take into account while preparing for your negotiation and understand the perspective of the supplier better is to download end of year reports, financial reports, and analyze those, because in the majority, I worked in the retail sector. Retailers are always making less margin versus suppliers, and it was just a fun fact for me to understand what is the margin that are the suppliers making and what is the margin we are making. And of course, we're talking EBITDA here, so in that sense, that information was important for me to understand as well.
Okay, and how do you set priorities and objectives for while you are preparing for the negotiation?
In that sense, it's important to have a structured way of preparing for your negotiation. And of course, it's a mix between where is the power, what are the objectives of you and your supplier, what are the deal variables, etc., etc. And so while answering those questions, it will become clear for you what you would like to achieve.
Yeah.
And this also brings me back to one of the first questions that we discussed is all your objectives should be aligned with where's your company heading towards and what are the important building blocks for your company. In that sense, for opening the negotiation, of course, you should think of what is the power balance between me and my suppliers? Do I want to open extreme? Yes or not? For example, I am against opening negotiations extreme, because if you do that, your supplier will also do that.
Yeah.
And then we all know this game, right? If you both open extreme, the game of negotiations is to slowly, step by step, in small proposals, come towards a middle ground.
Yeah.
But if you do not want to open extreme, you need to have trust. So in that sense, if there's trust, try to come up with your suppliers on an agreement before the negotiation. Are we both going to open realistic? That can save everyone an insane amount of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, when there's no trust, there's nothing left but sometimes to open extreme. And although I personally hate it, sometimes it's needed.
I would like to take the cue on that. And from what are things that while you are preparing for a negotiation, you should keep in mind from a supplier's point of view?
From a supplier's point of view, I think it's always interesting to know for sure if they are focusing on growing their business or on growing their margin. And of course, it can be an answer that they are focusing on both. But if you ask 20 questions, you will always find out what is the most important driver.
Yeah.
I would say that suppliers that are looking for growth, they would usually have deeper pockets in the negotiation to close win-win deals where they invest, for example, in your marketing facilities, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Of course, this differs per sector where you are working in. And the suppliers that are looking to gain more margin after their new negotiation, they will probably play a hardball game. But this is an important question to answer from the supplier's perspective while working in procurement, because this will probably determine how they will approach you and the negotiation.
Yeah, and it's really important to keep an empathic negotiation design, right?
For sure, yeah.
And how do you determine your partner while preparing for the negotiation?
Sometimes you'll find yourself in a negotiation when there's no alternative. So for the people who are relatively new into the world of procurement, BATNA is what is the best alternative you have to a negotiated agreement. I would say that sometimes you don't have an alternative. Then, of course, there's only one way to negotiate, and that is to make sure to push as hard as possible to make sure that the supplier comes towards your terms and your conditions.
Yeah.
But in here, my tip would be for any procurement professionals to spend as much as time possible to find alternatives for any of your upcoming deals. Because in the end, if you have 3 suppliers who are able to deliver the same goods or services rather than having only one, this will give you options. And having options will give you better pricing, better proposals, and a nicer negotiation game to play. Because in that sense, if you have 3 that you can negotiate at the same time to make sure to close a deal with 1, the outcome will always be better than if you only have 1.
And I have a great follow-up question for that. What strategies do you use to build strong relationships and trust with your suppliers?
Yeah, my first tip here for the audience will be agree with your suppliers on the way that you want to communicate with them. Yeah. So take, for example, when I was managing the category within the large global retailer, I had to manage 70 suppliers on a daily basis. The moment I started, I discussed with all my suppliers, okay, I tend to focus on answering all your questions within 24 hours. Of course, I will never be able to always reach that goal. But if you have small questions, don't share an email with me, just WhatsApp me. So I think that a tip to the audience will be, make sure to have a clear understanding and agreement with your suppliers on how do you communicate. In that sense, I've noticed while working together with over 1,000 sales professionals over the last 15 years, one of the most irritating points for sales professionals is if procurement does not reply back as fast as possible. The second tip is, if you don't have an answer, tell the people that you don't have an answer, but that you will come back to it maybe in a week or in a month. So in that sense, the second tip is with doing that, you manage expectations. Then, of course, the third tip is to not only invite all your suppliers always to your office, but also give them attention. Yeah. Whatever you give attention to grows, and what you would like to grow with your suppliers is mutual understanding and trust. What comes from building those two is the fact that you can create more likeliness of closing deals that have a win-win outcome. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that the combination of these tips helped me to build relationships.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marijn. I would like to shift the focus now to the audience. If you have any questions throughout the interview, feel free to use the comment section below. Me and Marijn will be there to answer all of you. It's our pleasure, so we are very happy to be here and having this interview for you guys. In the meantime, I would like to ask you another question.
Sure.
Which is, what are some effective tactics for negotiating better pricing?
I would say be cautious by only focusing all your tactics on better pricing, because if the period of the last 3 years with COVID, hyperinflation, shortage of raw materials learned us one important lesson from a procurement perspective, is that price is not always the most important variable. Yeah. We all had our supply chain disruptions. So over the last couple of years, what we learned here is that we should build relationships with our suppliers, because if any of your suppliers find themselves in a position again of either in delivering you or your competitors, you want them to deliver you. How do you fix that? With having the best supplier relationships as possible. What is needed for us from a procurement perspective to reach that goal is to have the great and the best soft skills as possible to create those relationships. Then, to answer your question specifically to what you asked, what are important tactics if you want to increase price? Then, in that sense, when there is no relationship and interdependency, then my tactic will be totally split the person from the content, be a hardball negotiator, set clear deadlines, push back, make sure you have an alternative so you can really push both suppliers towards the best price. But in this sense, and you can already tell it a bit from my non-verbal communication, I don't like to get into details here because I think that procurement is way more than only focusing on price. Yeah. And companies that are still thinking that procurement is an administrative task that focuses only on price, stop it. Bad.
No, that's great. And how do you balance cost savings? And this goes a little bit with the last question. Yeah. How do you balance cost savings while maintaining a good relationship with your supplier?
In that sense, they can go both ways if you respect the needs and the interests of suppliers. I would say that in an ideal world, I will challenge my suppliers on delivering products or services for a great price at a great pace. Of course, services are not delivered with supply chain issues, but of course, timing is also a very important topic there. And the third point is with the highest quality. So in that sense, I challenged the majority of my suppliers on a mix between those three. And of course, depending on the haste that we had internally, sometimes the supply chain was the most important factor. When we had years where margin was very important, I challenged my suppliers a bit more on price. And when we want to upgrade the majority of our products, of our services, I mostly challenged my suppliers on the third variable. So in that sense, that's being a procurement professional. It's like it's like finding the right balance between those three variables.
Great, thanks. But now I have a different question. Can you explain us the role of contracts in negotiations?
Yeah, so in that sense, again, I was a very practical procurement professional, and now I try to be a very practical entrepreneur. But in that sense, why am I sharing this? I hated contracts. Of course, it's a very important step in the total procurement process, because after your negotiation and your deal has been made, you have to create a contract. But to share a mistake that I made many times here is that, and this is also the answer to your question, I underestimated the importance of a contract too many times.
Yeah.
So, especially in my beginning years of procurement, and I was just negotiating, closing deals, and then I thought, okay, we shook hands here, we leave the room, and then if I email you next week with the deal that we closed, you will be directly confirm it, and we will make it into a contract, then that's it. That was very, very, very naive. I often found myself in negotiations where I thought that we had a full agreement via email or verbally on how the deal should look like. And then when we created the contract, we found ourselves negotiating again. Yeah. So in that sense, the better you are at closing deals and creating deal wrap-ups with you both confirm and agree with, the easier it is to create contracts. One tip, if you ever close a deal when just starting within working within procurement, make sure that the moment you close a deal, write the deal wrap-up together with your suppliers, send him or her an email and let him or her directly confirm it, because if you do that, you will find yourself in a way more efficient process towards the contract. Of course, and this also answers your question in a bit, if you don't have a contract at all, you will find yourself negotiating in year all the time about all the topics which are not on paper. So, of course, and I know that the majority of the procurement professionals watching this today, of course, you will have contracts with your suppliers. But I think that the point, and this is what we learned from training teams from all over the world, where people can still improve the most while working in procurement, is the phase between closing the deal and creation of the contract. There, we all lose time, and we don't want.
That's great knowledge that I think our audience will find valuable. How do you manage and mitigate risks throughout a negotiation?
Let me share a mistake here. What I did, and the tip can be derived for the audience by that. So, in the first couple of years while working as a procurement professional, I tend to, I would say, include as less as variables as possible in the actual contract, because I thought that would give me freedom in year to renegotiate things. The lesson that I learned was that it was very naive. So the more clear you are on all the deal variables and how the better you include them in the contract, the more, I would say, focus this gives in year to focus on the execution of the deal. So I thought initially in the first few years, if we make a light contract, this will give us more freedom in year, but it's the other way around. Yeah. You should include everything because that gives you more freedom in year.
And what role does data and analytics play in forming a negotiation strategy?
Why I really like to work within the field of procurement and negotiations is because while you are preparing for your negotiation and negotiating yourself, you need two very important skills. So in the negotiation preparation part, it's all about having analytical skills. But in the negotiation itself, it's more, the personal perspective. You need to interact with people. why I love the analytical part of the first one is because start early. Don't start with your preparations too late. I found myself way too often in a situation like that. But if you take the time to start early with the preparation of your negotiation, it can be so nice to form your opinion on all the conclusions that you will derive from all the data.
Yeah.
And of course, if you want to prepare for your negotiation thoroughly, you should know which questions to answer. If you need help on the questions, feel free to contact us. We will be more than happy to help you. But what I enjoy the most of the negotiation preparation part and the analytical thinking part is that first you analyze the data to answer your questions. After you answered your questions, you can transform your conclusions into a strategy. And in the negotiation itself, it's only transforming the strategy towards a great deal. So I really enjoyed all these three steps: the analytical part, the strategy part, and the implementing the strategy yourself part. And in that sense, that's why I love procurement, and that's why I will love procurement forever.
Great. Now we are approaching the end of this interview. I have one last question for you, Marijn. How do you ensure that at the end of a negotiation, both parties are satisfied?
The answer is you can never ensure this. But I would say, if you would like that, is starting your negotiation with what is important for the other party. And during the negotiation, do not forget that. Of course, you can be a hardball negotiator and you can deliver short-term savings for your company to push your suppliers towards the maximum. Then you will become a successful procurement professional for your company for the short term. But for the long term, suppliers do not want to work together with you or your company anymore, and you will harm your business. This brings me back to one of the questions we discussed earlier as well.
Yeah.
If you only focus on price, I truly believe you can achieve more savings on the short term, but being able to, I would say, create relationships with your supplier will help you and your business way more on the long term. And again, we are here from a procurement perspective to drive value for our company, not only savings for the long term.
Great, thanks, Marijn. As we are approaching now the end of this interview, I would like to ask you all, if you have any questions, me and Marijn will be there to answer all of your questions, so just put them in the comment section below. In the meantime, Marijn, do you have any final words that you'd like to share?
No, it was a pleasure to be here. I hope I was able to inspire you with all the mistakes that I made throughout my career. I think that the main conclusion for the audience should be, don't be me. And if you ever want to learn more on how to prepare for your negotiation, feel free to contact us. We'll be more than happy to help you and your team.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being there. And it was great having you here, and you as well, Marijn. So we'll see you again in our next interview in a few weeks.